Hey everyone, it's Dale, and we're going to do class a little bit differently this week because I have a engagement at 6:30 on Monday with Amanda Zamora from the Texas Tribune. I'll be interviewing her at Old Main 234. You are, of course, invited to come. It'll be a fantastic talk about news and entrepreneurship and things along those lines. But if you're not interested in listening to that, that's why I'm recording the lecture right now. You'll be responsible for watching this, and then we'll use the second half of class time once I'm done with my interview to discuss our podcasts and move forward with those. So let's talk about podcasting in general and what makes a good podcast. I'm sure, especially since we've had this boom in podcast popularity in the past couple of years. You probably have a few podcasts that you listen to on a regular basis or that you've listened to in the past. So I'll just give you a couple of examples of my favorite podcasts, and we'll talk about why I think or what I think makes a good podcast. I'm sure y'all have all heard of Serial. In case not, the theme music there should be giving you a hint. Serial's been one of my favorite podcasts, and really spurred the huge interest in podcasts moving forward. The producers of Serial actually just released a new one this past week called S-Town or Shit-Town, and I binge listened to that. It was 7 episodes, about an hour each. Really, really interesting story, so we'll talk about that here in just a second. And then I really loved this one called Mystery Show that unfortunately has been canceled. But what it was a producer who also works on Serial now. She would go out and just solve these kind of everyday mysteries. People would write her and say, or one example was that Britney Spears walked out of a restaurant in like the mid 2000s with this woman's book that she wrote, and she wanted to know how Britney Spears got her hands on that book. And so the host actually figured out that mystery and did so. So just like with any great story or any great, video story or anything else, I think a podcast, what makes it great as well is a great story, meaning the actual story that comes along with it, and a great characters, or a great topic in general. So if you go back to the 3 that I just mentioned, Serial, of course, the first season was a really interesting story, and I think Serial hit kind of a road bump in season 2 because it just wasn't that interesting of a story. It was really difficult to understand, but they obviously hit a home run with season 1 because the story was so gripping. Shit-Town is all about this one guy's life in rural Alabama, and he is one of the most interesting characters you will ever see or meet possible in a podcast. So it really did hammer home that point of being an interesting character. And then Mystery Show is just an interesting topic. Every single week there was some new crazy topic that she was looking into investigating. So I think those 3 that I mentioned kind of carry that line of interesting stories, interesting characters, interesting topics to do so. It's not all that easy. It can be kind of difficult to find those things, but the ones that do it well tend to become very popular. So how do you make a great podcast? I figured I would start by showing y'all what some of the top podcasters in the country think, or in the world. This was an article in The Guardian that just came out, and here's what a few of them had to say. Here's the host of Lore podcast say, "There's one thing that makes me subscribe to a podcast: quality. I give a lot of shows a try. A friend will recommend a show, or I'll see one highlighted in an article, and I'll click the link, so I'm happy to try things out, but if it's not good, I won't come back." That applies to just regular, storytelling in general, right? We're willing to give a lot of stuff a try, but if it's not good, we're not going to keep going. So keep that in mind as you think about what makes a good podcast. Here's what Linda Holmes from Pop Culture Happy Hour had to say. She said, "People don't understand that people who produce high-quality chat shows spend a lot of time editing and cutting them. Don't be in the position of thinking that for the low price of a couple of hours of work a week, you can make something that is going to make something that sounds like it came out of BuzzFeed." So they take work, right? I mean, it's not just the interview or the production itself. Then it's the post production, just like you experienced with your video stories. Going to the park and shooting all the stories was just half the battle, right? Now we've been focusing the past couple weeks. In fact, we've been spending way more time on the editing than we did on the actual story production and development. And same thing with podcasts. And then finally, Reggie Osse, who hosts the Combat Jack show, said, "For anyone who wants to start a podcast, my advice is simple. Just do it. Don't be self-conscious. Don't worry about whether you sound like this person or that person. Just do it." So in that vein, let's do this, right? We're going to start a podcast for this class. And it's going to focus on, obviously, our park experiences. But the first step when developing a podcast is planning. And so fortunately for you, I've gone through and already done most of this planning for you. So here are the things we're going to go through. We're going to develop a name, a topic, a logo, a theme, length of the podcast, the format of the podcast, roles for you, and we'll come up with a bit of a script in order to help smooth things in and smooth things out while you're working on the podcast. So like I said, I've gone through a lot of this planning process already. The name of our podcast is going to be the Parks Podcast. And the topic is going to be your park experience, whether that is our time at Bastrop or your second park experience or any other stories you want to share about previous parks experiences. That is going to be our topic. It's going to be about our times in the parks, whether that's with this class or outside of this class. I went ahead and created a logo. Here is the logo of our podcast, so you can see that there. The theme song of our logo will be this. So this will be the music. I'm going to lower this just a little bit. This will be the music we use to come into our podcast and also to fade out of our podcast. So I will be sharing this clip with y'all as y'all begin to work on your podcast assignments. The length of this, it's not going to be long. So most podcasts are about an hour, 45 minutes to an hour. That's asking too much of y'all, I think. So I'm going to say 10 to 15 minutes. All right. That should give you time to introduce the story that you're going to be talking about that day and, get some good quality interaction between each other. And 10 to 15 minutes, that should be a pretty good length. If you want to go a little bit longer, that's your call. It just needs to be really interesting, right? Don't go longer just for the sake of going longer. And you really shouldn't be going any shorter than 10 minutes. You should be able to fill at least 10 minutes with that. The format's going to be a talk show. So y'all will be interviewing each other. And who does that, we'll talk about here in just a second. But I want this to be sharing of experiences. I want y'all to be talking with each other and sharing these interesting stories and experiences you've had. Remember, you're in a class that, as I've told you, I've heard from people all around the country, like people are so envious and interested in this class. So share those interesting stories, right? You have something to talk about. The roles will be host and guest. So who is a host and who is a guest is up to you. But I did a random draw of names and I have assigned teams for this. So between the two of you, you will need to decide who will be the host, who will be the guest. Think of your own personalities and who you think has the better stories to share, and we'll kind of go through each of these. But here are the host responsibilities. One, you need to nail the introduction, which I'll have a script for that I'll share with you. You need to facilitate the conversation, so you need to keep things going. You need to keep the guest on track. You need to ask good questions in order to elicit those good stories. You need to listen for any potential follow-up questions that you might be able to ask. You need to decide when or if you're going to use any sound from the park. So if y'all start talking about, specific stories from the park and you want to use a soundbite from someone, you'll need to decide when to do that and, do that in post-production as well. And then you need to nail the close, which again, I'll have a script for that. The guest responsibilities aren't as long, but they're possibly even more important. One, you have to be interesting, right? It sucks to have a guest who is not interesting. So you need to tell good stories. You need to help the host keep up the pace and the flow. Your stories need to be snippy, short, interesting. Okay, I have be interesting on there twice because as a guest, you have to be interesting. So here's that random draw I did of names. These will be your assignments in the podcast assignment. So Max and Megan will work together. Allison and Tyler will work together. Preston and Taylor Martz. Taylor Heap and Ben. Jessica and Diana. Shane and Taylor McNair. Renee and Victoria. Ricky and Gabby. Amy and Marco. And unfortunately, we have 19. So one of y'all is going to get stuck with me to make it an even 20. And Autumn drew the short straw. So Autumn is stuck with me for this assignment. The script is just for the introduction and close. So as you move forward, we need to have them all be consistent. So whoever the host is, this will be the introduction. Hello, welcome to this edition of the Parks Podcast, featuring students from the School of Journalism and Mass Communications, Mobile Storytelling, and the Parks course. My name is Dale Blassingham, and I'm your host for this edition. My guest today is whoever your guest is, right? And then as you get toward the end of it, this needs to be the last thing. Thanks. That's all for this edition of the Parks Podcast. You can check out all of our content from the Parks on Instagram by searching the SJMC Parks hashtag. We'll see you next time. And then you'll have the music fade out, and that will be the end of the podcast. What happens in the middle, that's up to you and the guest, or the host and the guest, as you develop content for this. So step 2 will actually involve recording the podcast, but first you need a game plan. So that's what we'll be doing Monday in class. You need to, one, decide who's going to be the host, who's going to be the guest. You need to talk through the process of, okay, what stories can we tell? What questions will I ask? What, adventures do we want to talk about? This happens on talk shows all the time. It is no coincidence that when a guest goes on Fallon or Jimmy Kimmel or Colbert, that they always bring up these random topics. It's because those have been discussed beforehand and we're determined to be good stories. So that's what we'll be handling Monday, determine these good stories. From there, I have a podcast microphone that y'all can use. If we choose to go this way, we'll need to divvy up some days because, I only have one microphone. If you choose to use your phone, just know that it's going to be kind of awkward. You'll be recording into the butt end of the phone, the bottom end of the phone, using the voice recorder, and then you'll need to make sure and be handing that back and forth, or the host will need to be holding it. So that really kind of kills any chance of interaction. So I would prefer for us to use the podcast microphone if possible, and I can set up a time schedule where, one team will have it these days, the other team will have it this day, so on and so forth. That way everyone has a shot with it. Step 3 will then be editing. So again, this is only a 10 to 15 minute clip, so the editing shouldn't be all that intense. I'm going to recommend you use a program called Audacity, Audacity. It's a free download on Mac or a PC. And the great thing about Audacity, one, it's pretty easy to use. And two, Audacity has a wiki with every single tutorial you could ever think of in your life. So if you have any questions at all, you can use Audacity and, you can click on these tutorials. You're not going to even need a tenth of this. Really, it's just, how to import your file, how to edit your file, how to bring in some music, and how to save, really. So don't let this intimidate you. I just wanted to show you that they have a ton of tutorials so they can really walk you through the process of doing that. Now, there is the chance that you can use iMovie for this as well. If you remember, for those of you who used iMovie, you can separate audio files or you can upload audio files. You'll need to probably lay down the logo for a certain amount of time so that you can have a video bed for that, because iMovie will not just allow you to record audio. You have to have some sort of video clip to lay the audio down, but that's easy enough. You can just import the logo for the show, make it 15 minutes, and then drag in all your audio clips and start editing that way. There may be some issues in terms of editing or in terms of sharing the clip, which we'll talk about here next, but iMovie, you can also do that. And I believe there are steps you can do in order to edit or share the file as an MP3 or as an audio file moving forward. And then step 4 will be sharing that podcast once you're done. And for now, I'll handle the sharing. Normally you would go through like the iTunes process or post it somewhere. Y'all are just going to post the audio file on Slack, and I'll take care of the rest of it for there. So we have a full month to handle this. We have 10 teams. If we think about, the podcast microphone, that gives each team about 3 days. So we'll talk about this Monday in class as well. But this should be exciting. It's just another way, another tool for you to learn and share your experiences and add something else on your resume that you've been a podcast guest or a podcast host and that you helped start a podcast. And I plan to keep this going throughout, the semesters that I teach this class. So y'all are going to be the introductory group of collaborators on this podcast, and I'm excited about it. And it should be good. So I will see y'all Monday around 7:45 if you choose to not come to the Amanda Zamora talk. Otherwise, I'll see you Monday at 6:30 in Old Main 234.